Welcome to Ballot Battleground, Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Marjat, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. For the first time in 2 decades, a Republican presidential candidate has won the Silver State. Former President Donald Trump is projected to be the 47th president of the United States, and he looks like he could sweep all 7 of the battleground states in what's shaping up to be a landslide victory. The national broadcasts and pundits will cover that race extensively in greater detail than we ever could, so we'll leave that analysis to them and try and stick to Nevada here. So we'll focus on how President Trump beat his 2016 and 2020 margins to win Nevada for the first time, and how GOP Senate candidate Sam Brown overperformed expectations and the polls, and as of this recording has a slight lead over Democratic incumbent Senator Jackie Rosen. A disclaimer before we get into all of it, all the results and numbers are, as of this recording, around midday Wednesday and are subject to change. We'll put a link to the most up-to-date results in the show notes. We'll start with the race for president, where Trump, as of this recording, was ahead by 4.6 points in Nevada, winning 16 of Nevada's 17 counties and our 6 electoral votes. Swing Washoe, which went blue for Biden in 2020, is red as of now, with Trump ahead by 4,600 or so votes. Meanwhile, Harris was only carrying Dem-heavy Clark County by about 8,000 votes, not nearly enough to make up for the landslide in rural red Nevada. We won't go too deep on the Senate race yet because it is too close to call. As of this recording, Brown was ahead by 0.03 of a point. That is subject to change with a big batch of results expected from deep red Nye County sometime Wednesday, and lots of mail still expected in the urban counties, Clark and Washoe. Both Rosen and Brown held their election night watch parties in southern Nevada. Our sister station was at both. Let's hear what the candidates had to say late Tuesday, with the race still way too close to call.
Everyone who's supported my campaign, everyone who's been out knocking doors, making calls, telling their friends. Together we have reached Nevadans in every corner of our state. We're going to win. We're going to win. We're going to win. And you know what we all did? We fought hard. We fought hard for our shared values, that every hardworking Nevadan deserves a level playing field and an economy that works for them. And I'm going to finish with this because I know it's not the last time we're going to be together, because we're going to be together to celebrate our victory. And it doesn't matter who's in the White House, because here in Nevada, you'll have me in your house with you.
We're going to keep working over these next couple of days because, and this is a message to everyone watching out there on TV, check and see if your ballot was counted. There are thousands of ballots that have been legally cast that need to be cured over the next few days. We must double our effort to get in touch with every single person who has cast their ballot on time, but it was not yet counted, and make sure that those ballots are cured. Because a something thousand vote lead right now doesn't count for anything if we don't have a lead at the end of the counting period. Am I right? So in the same way that you delivered for President Trump tonight, and he is going to the White House, let's continue our work, and I will go to the United States Senate to represent you come January.
No word yet on if Rosen or Brown plans to make any public remarks on Wednesday. So how did a presidential race that polled neck and neck both nationally and in Nevada, and a Senate race that showed Rosen with a lead of over 5 points in the polling average, end up here, with the presidency being called overnight for Trump, and with Rosen and Brown's race likely to come down to only a few thousand votes? We were able to book the always fantastic Cook Political Report on this week's show. Analyst Matthew Klein was gracious enough to give us some time to dive deeper into how we got here, which demographic groups shifted, which groups sat this one out, and what are we still waiting to learn. It was a great conversation with Matthew Klein, and do stick around after that interview. We have some great insights from 2 of our reporters on the ground on election night, Kim Burrows and Sophie Lincoln. But first, Matthew Klein of the Cook Political Report. Matthew Klein with the Cook Political Report joining us now from the East Coast, where he was up till Well, you said 4 in the morning, Matthew, and you're still making time for us. We appreciate it.
Of course.
How many cups of coffee? How many caffeine drinks? What are we talking?
More than I think the doctor would recommend me to be having. But you do what you got to do on these election days. So it's our Super Bowl, in the political journalism world.
Absolutely. Yeah. The limit does not exist for how much caffeine you can consume November 5th, 6th, maybe into November 7th. We'll see. All right. The main reason we wanted to talk to you is just to get an idea, kind of zooming out a little bit from Nevada to find out what happened in this election, because it, as you well know, I don't have to explain this to you, supposed to be a very close race. It ended up not being that close in terms of the Electoral College, at least. Trump winning the popular vote. It was not the neck and neck tie that had been forecast in the polls for weeks. Real quick, hot take off the top here. What happened?
Well, look, I do think it was closer than some of these numbers are letting on. I mean, we knew heading into day that a lot of these swing states were going to be whoever wins. One or two swing states, they all tend to kind of go the same way. And Wisconsin, it was only decided by 0.9, Georgia by 2. I mean, it's not like these are landslide margins. Trump swept them all. And so obviously that makes his electoral college number look very good. And there's still a ways to go in the popular vote, I'll add. California hasn't finished counting, and it's far from finished counting. But look, I mean, what happened was, in my view, a fundamental reshaping of the party coalitions. And in last night's case, it benefited exclusively one party. I don't think there was a single county in the United States that Kamala Harris flipped from Donald Trump in 2020.
Wow.
And that's an astonishing statistic. I believe you'd have to go back to the 1930s, 1936, to find the last time that happened. Kamala Harris, in many ways, did the best that she could, given the circumstances, which are the president of the United States has a 41% approval rating. The feelings about the economy are generally quite negative. A large majority of Americans believe that the country is headed on the wrong track. And in those sorts of circumstances, it's just very hard to go out and wave the flag for the incumbent party. At the same time, Trump made some pretty noticeable inroads, particularly with Latino voters in Nevada for sure, but all over the country, even in cities. I mean, he's getting the highest share for a Republican in the Bronx since Ronald Reagan in 1984. And it's safe to say that working class voters in this country are making of all races are making a turn to the GOP.
Which demographic shift had the biggest impact? There's been a lot of talk about the gender gap, gender divide, men versus women, younger voters trending more towards Trump. And then, of course, obviously the all important Latino vote. Which was most important to you in terms of deciding this election last night?
All of it. I mean, I don't think there was any one demographic trend that shaped this race more than others. They all shifted toward Donald Trump by about similar margins. Latino, obviously the Latino change is pretty substantial. This is the first time in history, really, that we've seen Democrats do this poorly with Latinos. They'll probably, we've got a ways to go before the votes are counted and all the data's added up, but it looks like Harris will win them by somewhere in the range of single digits, which is considerably down from the margin by which Democrats were winning them, even as recently as 2016. So big factor. Absolutely, Trump made some gains with men, minority men in particular, that I think made a substantial difference in a lot of these Rust Belt states. But really, Harris did not do as well with college-educated white women as a lot of people were expecting. The suburbs were supposed to be her path to counteract some of those losses. Everyone knew she was going to suffer losses with minorities, but she was expected to counteract that somewhere in the suburbs, and that really just didn't materialize.
Do you see this? A lot of people will maybe point to this and say, this was a huge polling miss, again, like in 2016. But what I hear you saying maybe is that, the swing states are all going to end up being within 2, 3, 4 points. That's kind of maybe within the margin of error. Is it Is it a huge polling miss, or was this kind of within the range of outcomes that we could have expected from the polls?
If you go back and you look at the polling averages, which are really the metric that you should be using rather than individual polls, the results are not that far off from that. I mean, the final grouping there had Trump ahead in Georgia, and was ahead in North Carolina, ahead in Arizona, ahead in Nevada. It did seem like the blue wall was going to be slightly better for Harris, but we're not talking about the 5 to 6 point misses that we had in 2016 and 20. These are talking more like 1 or 2 point misses, which is about as good as we can expect polling to be. Even in some of these states that saw massive shifts like New York, New Jersey, we're still waiting on California, but if I had to guess, there's going to be a considerable shift toward Republicans there. We had seen polls that indicated that Kamala Harris was in a much worse position than Joe Biden had been in 2020. And so I don't think there's much that's surprising to us at this point. There was one poll that came out over the weekend from the Des Moines Register of Iowa that had Kamala Harris up 3 points. It got a lot of national attention.
Yeah.
It was conducted by Ann Selzer, who's generally got a very good reputation, but it was off by several orders of magnitude. And needless to say, that was an absolute outlier. For the most part, though, the polling industry seems to have held up better this cycle, certainly than it has in any of the last presidential election cycles.
If you're a Democrat or a Democratic strategist, is there something that you can take away from these results that could portend optimism moving forward? Because I don't know, you mentioned, she didn't even make as big a gains with suburban college-educated women as was expected. I mean, is there anything that they can point to and say, this is where we can kind of improve with this demographic group moving forward? Or is it pretty bleak for them?
It's pretty bleak, but I will say this. First of all, nothing's ever written in stone. I mean, these changes happen. I mean, who would have thought, 10 years ago that we would be talking about Donald Trump being competitive with the Latino vote? I mean, that seemed like that was going to be there were discussions that could end the GOP as we know it. And, here we are. So I don't want to make too many broad predictions, but if I had to guess, Democrats, if there's any upside for Democrats tonight, it's that they did manage to keep those blue wall states pretty close. All of them will end up within 3 points. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a landslide. Trump's win in the popular vote, if he does get one, will be very small. Democrats are still a very competitive political party. They just got the short end of the stick, I think, with regard to a lot of the economic policies that are, that have been put in place, voters' perception of how things have gone the last few years, and they took it out on the incumbent party.
And then lastly, anything specific to Nevada, or was Nevada kind of subject to the same trends that we've been talking about here? Trump gaining with Latino voters and a little bit with younger voters. Anything interesting, unique coming out of Nevada, or similar trends to the battlegrounds? Similar
trends. And Nevada's interesting. I mean, it's got a high Hispanic population, very diverse, high white working class population. So it was expected to be good for Trump all along. Republicans felt very good about flipping Nevada months and months ago, even when Joe Biden was the nominee. Democratic strength in Nevada, they've always won it by 2-3 points. These are narrow margins. I'm sure you all know that, Catherine Cortez Masto winning by less than a point in 2022. So Nevada is always a very close state. And it's not surprising that Republicans would manage, even with small inroads, manage to get over that hurdle there. I do think, obviously a big question mark is the Reid machine that famously dominated the state's political arena for decades. Is that really still functioning? Can the Culinary Workers Union really be relied on at this point? I don't know. I think it certainly seems like they, were not quite the force that they were in 2020 and 2022. But Jackie Rosen could very plausibly still pull out a victory in the Senate race and the House. There's a lot that remains to be seen, but I think Nevada, for the most part, was in line.
All right, Matthew Klein, thank you so much for joining us from the excellent Cook Political Report. One of the best in the industry. We appreciate it. Get some sleep and keep at it.
I'll do my best. Thanks.
special thanks to the Cook Political Report's Matthew Klein for making time for us. My TV stations, News 4 and Fox 11, we had live team coverage all night long for election night from the registrar's office, polling places, watch parties, and more. We caught up with Kim Burrows. She was stationed at the Ballot Processing Center in Washoe County. Then Sophie Lincoln, who was tracking that 2+ hour line at UNR, one of a few sites that delayed the release of results late Tuesday night. So first you'll hear from Kim Burrows, then our chat with Sophie Lincoln. Well-caffeinated and sleep-deprived Kim Burrows joining us in the Ballot Battleground Nevada studio on this Wednesday morning. Which is harder for you? I know my answer. Is it Wednesday morning post-election or Tuesday night actually getting through all the way till 1 or 2 in the morning?
No, Tuesday's great because you're excited. You're excited about covering the election. Wednesday, the hangover from election is always the worst. Not because I was drinking last night, of course.
Yes.
Just being out late. And you're just as caffeinated and you're just as crazy. This is going to be a great podcast. You should listen to this whole thing, right?
I was going to say, we're going to be jumbling our words all over the place. So appreciate making time for us because there's a lot going on, Kim.
Yes.
You do many other stories unrelated to elections. Today, we're talking elections because you're our woman in the belly of the beast on election night for the past several elections, which is the ballot processing room and the Washoe County complex. We've chatted about this in previous elections, but for new listeners who haven't heard those previous episodes, what's it like in there? Just describe it for us, the scene in kind of the heart of the whole operation for Washoe County.
It is. It's the whole buzz of everything coming in for Washoe County in this circumstance. The Registrar of Voters is the place where all the ballots are processed and counted. This one in Washoe County is super jam-packed. There's staff members buzzing all over the place. The cartridges that are coming in and the ballots that come in through the garage, they get taken by staff members. The staff members immediately start feeding them into the machines. The machines are abuzz, making a lot of noise, and people running all over the place when these polling locations come in. And then there's some lull until the next ballots come in, and then we buzz all over again. And then there's an observation room in the corner where Republicans, Democrats, nonpartisan, and others can sit. There's room for 8 people in there that can sit and watch the process and just see what's going on. But it's a buzz of activity. Last night, Tuesday night, was different. Because we had NBC, we had CBS, we had just a crush of people that were there.
Tons of national outlets.
Right, because we're, a state that they're clearly trying to vie for our votes, but just we've had some issues in the past, some slow delays, and I think just people are really watching Washoe County to see how it's going and what is causing some of the delays in previous elections.
Yeah, walk us through the timeline a little bit because we know from our reporting from our Sophie Lincoln that UNR was one that kind of tied things up because there were so many new voters, college students registering for the first time. So a lot of same-day registrations at UNR, and that was one of the last polling places to close. What were we waiting on? And was it the UNR? Was it one of the other sites? And when did we finally get those?
It was first UNR because the deputy registrar of voters, who is kind of filling in for the interim that's out right now, he was telling us, just like college students, they procrastinated and waited until the last minute to go and vote, which caused the long line. But they also a lot of them were new voters, so they did have to sign up these voters, and that took time as well. So they were, we thought, going to be the last polling location. It turns out the Reno Sparks Indian Colony, we were told, had 2 people still in line and got that taken care of. The polls closed at 7, and again, as you know, Ben, people can vote if they're in line at 7 o'clock and their vote will be counted. We started getting returns, and the ballots started coming in at about 8:30. Okay. So, an hour and a half, not bad. And then we got some of the final results. I think it was closer to 10 o'clock when things were really starting buzzing. And the first round of results. The first rounds, came in. And then the very last ones came in at just after midnight, 10 minutes after 11, 10 minutes after midnight. Everyone cheered, including the media, that just wanted to make sure everybody got checked in appropriately, and it was good.
Awesome. So, we had the 2 big batches of results that came out at kind of staggered times throughout the evening. And as we know, we're going to get probably 1 update per day kind of moving on for the next few days until this thing's all wrapped up. Tell me, though, about the kind of safeguards that are in place. For example, no trash cans is one where you cannot throw anything away. Some of the different procedures and processes that are in place to kind of protect the integrity of the system?
This one was different just because it was a general election. They're still working on some of the processes of the media and such. So I'll tell you what we do as media. We now have special IDs that get us into that back room of the registrar's office, the processing room, if you will. And if you did not have that specially approved and issued ID specifically from the registrar or voter's office, they did not let you in. You needed to be pre-approved. So they're not just going to let anybody in there. We had a security guard that stood guard in the back of the building there, so watched us come and go and made sure everybody had IDs. The trash cans are limited. There are a couple of them, I believe, in there, but they are limited because there is, more scrutiny than ever about, what are in the trash cans? Who are the people here? All the staff members have to have identification on them to say not only their name, but whether they're Republican, Democrat, nonpartisan. So there's a lot of that going on. I did see in the observation room, they are not allowed to have cell phones in there, and staff members do not have cell phones as well. We can as the media because we're making phone calls and covering news. But I turned around and saw an observer with a long lens still camera, and she was shooting pictures. And I asked, is that allowed? And she could, and anybody can have a camera in there. They just can't have a cell phone. I thought that was a little unusual.
Interesting. Tell me, there were a couple things different when it comes to the new mail ballot processor. I believe it was $500,000 for this massive piece of equipment, as well as, the new system, the VREMs, which we have talked about several times on the podcast. I don't want to get into exactly, but were there any issues or snafus with kind of those two new changes that we have seen?
And we also had a new ballot extractor. We have four machines, and the extractors take the ballot. Ben, you actually got to test it out and actually pull the ballots. It takes them out of the envelope. So we had those four machines humming. We had the giant processor that, you're right, was $500,000. There were no issues at all. And I kept asking Mr. McDonald, the deputy registrar, I said, are there any issues? Are there any jam ups? At one point early in the process, when they got this fired up, they send the ballots through in batches of 50 when they get them, so that they're just not doing 10 and 10 and 10, and it just kind of runs the machine. There was one that I think got stopped up a little bit in there, but they just quickly corrected it. With the old system, that machine got jammed up all the time. The belts were bad. They had parts that were breaking. They had old staff members extracting machines the old way. They had 2 employees that were taking ballots out by hand. So this has streamlined the process. And the registrar told us, the deputy registrar told us, that it's 30 to 40% faster that they could process these ballots. So things were really they would turn it on. It would be on for not even 30 seconds and shut it off, and they had everything all processed through. It was pretty crazy how well it ran, and I just was expecting something because it was new. We never saw it, and they never told us there were any issues.
Glad to hear that, because obviously there were a lot of concerns about how that night was going to go, given the potential transition in leadership, which, as you alluded to, the interim registrar out on leave. There's a lot of drama that has kind of come out in the past few weeks, which we don't need to get into now, but glad to hear that it seemed to go smoothly for the most part. Obviously, it takes a little bit longer than people would sometimes like, especially when the nation is seeing every state light up with some sort of results. And I think at one point Nevada was kind of the last state of the contiguous 48 states to not have any results coming in at all. But it takes time to count these ballots, and you rather take the time to do it right.
I was a little surprised. This year we could start counting the ballots at 8 a.m. That was the stuff that came in all before, the mail-in ballots and those early votes. They could start counting those, obviously not releasing any results. But I thought we would see a little earlier returns, knowing that we could start counting them at 8 a.m., and we just didn't see that. That didn't happen. I felt like, although last election, I do remember we had a lag as well. And so, I don't know, maybe that's just our new norm. We want to get it right? Rather than be fast.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Kim, we'll let you get back to your regular job, investigative reporting. Thank you so much for making some time for us. Drink some more caffeine. Keep the faith here. It's going to be a fun rest of the week.
Yeah, sure will. Thanks for having me.
And also making time for us on the post-election day pod, reporter Sophie Lincoln. First appearance on the pod as well. Thank you so much for being here, Sophie.
Yeah, honored to make it on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. So you had the honor and pleasure of being our reporter, checking out all the different lines, especially long lines last night on election night. And UNR was one place that we kind of centered on early. I think I clicked the Vote Center wait time tool app, and I saw 144 minutes. And so it's okay. Let's send Sophie out to UNR. So you head to campus. It's at the Joe Crowley Student Union, right? What's the scene like when you get to UNR yesterday afternoonish?
Yeah, so when I first got there a little earlier in the afternoon, and that's when the wait was pretty long. I saw the 144 minutes. It was a little before then. I think it was closer to like 100 minutes, but still
Sheesh.
a very long line there. And mostly, I would say probably more than 90% of those people in line were college age students.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And normally that wouldn't be so big of an issue if they were just checking in and voting, but there's this other step where a lot of these people, college kids, they're 18, 19, 20, that is
Right.
their first election. And so what do they have to do as they're kind of checking in for the first time?
Yeah, so I spoke to a lot of students, and also the site manager of that polling location had told me that there was an overwhelming amount of people who were first-time voters and had to actually register to vote before they actually cast their ballots. So, of course, that takes a little bit of extra time. I also spoke to a voter who had just found out that day that even though she was out of state, she could vote here day of and do a provisional ballot. So I think that definitely added to the delay there.
Yeah, and I saw at one point, I think mid-afternoon, don't hold me to this exactly, but there are over 1,000 provisional ballots that had been cast in Washoe County, and it seemed just anecdotally that a lot of those were coming out of UNR college students, same-day registration, which is a great thing that Nevada has. The flip side of that is it just takes a lot longer. So was it
Right.
truly, an hour, 44 minutes, so, that's well over 2 hours. Was it really taking that long last night?
Yeah, so kind of went in waves. By the end of the night, it took a little less time than the deputy registrar of voters had initially kind of estimated. He estimated that it was going to take an additional 3 hours after the polls closed
Wow.
at 7 to get through everybody who was still in line at that point. It was a little closer, maybe a little under 2.5 hours. So
Yeah.
still a long wait there. But yeah, definitely lots of people to get through. And I think some of those people who were still in line waiting after the polls closed also still had to register to vote. So that kind of dragging out the process a little bit.
Yeah. Well, hats off to all the students and all the voters that, procrastinated a little bit, but that's okay. Because if you're in line by 7, you can do it. But waiting in that long of a line, to do your civic duty is a great thing, and awesome that Nevada allows people to finish casting their ballots before any results are released, because I think
Yep.
that's a good thing as well. There's been a lot of talk about the youth vote. Normally, Democrats are able to win kind of the 18 to 29 category by a huge margin. Younger voters tend to not turn out at very high rates, but they win them by a big margin. And it seems like from a lot of the exit polling that Donald Trump has been able to really shrink those margins.
Yeah.
Obviously, you weren't doing an exit poll out there, but anecdotally from the handful of voters that you talked to, did you see a little bit more enthusiasm for Donald Trump than you might have expected in cycles past?
Yeah, definitely. And I will say too, I also spoke to a handful of students in early voting where I was able to ask them who they voted for and why. And I personally was surprised, being on a college campus, you do tend to think of people leaning more Democratic on college campuses. But I would say in my experience speaking to those students, it was pretty split, but a slight majority for Trump with the people that I spoke to.
Interesting. Any comments from some of those younger voters that stood out to you doing interviews with many of them?
Yeah, I think the two kind of main reasons out of those students who did vote for Trump, they pointed to economics being a big part of why they voted the way they did, and also foreign policy. I know Charlie Kirk made it to
Oh, right.
UNR's
Yeah.
campus, and some people had pointed out that he highlighted the fact that there were no wars during Trump's first presidency. So those were a couple reasons that the Trump students gave me. On the other side, with the students I spoke to who were in favor of Harris, I know that reproductive health was a really big issue to them.
No doubt. Okay. And then last observation for me was there was a lot of talk of this Joe Rogan interview that Trump did, and I was watching NBC, and I think it was Gadi Schwartz, I think is his name. He was at my alma mater, Arizona State, interviewing voters in Tempe, Arizona, and he spoke to one voter at least. Again, it's one-off an anecdote, but he said, I was swayed by the fact that Trump did go on Joe Rogan's podcast and disappointed by the fact that Kamala Harris did not. Did that come up with any of your conversations at all, or?
That did not come up in any of my conversations, but I have heard that as well. Not necessarily from students, but that people were disappointed that she didn't end up going on the podcast.
Yeah, such a huge audience, and guessing that helped contribute to why Donald Trump did so well with men last night and helped put him over the top in the landslide fashion that we saw last night. So, Sophie Lincoln, thank you so much. You've got another story you're working on today, so appreciate you making time for Ballot Battleground Nevada and your coverage last night. Important coverage on election night. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.
All right, there's still a lot to come as the dust settles from this election, but a few quick updates on some races and ballot measures we've covered on this show. Representative Mark Amodei easily won re-election to Nevada's 2nd Congressional District, defeating the well-funded, nonpartisan challenger Greg Kidd by over 20 percentage points at last check. Question 3, the open primaries and ranked choice voting measure, which passed in 2022, failed this time. At last check, no was winning by almost 9 points, and so those voting reforms will not become part of the state constitution. We also did shows on questions 5, 6, and 7. All 3 of them passed. That was the sales tax exemption for child and adult diapers, the constitutional right to abortion until fetal viability, and voter ID. Those last 2, abortion rights and voter ID, will need to pass again in 2026 to take effect. The diaper tax exemption will take effect and become law soon. For all other races, state legislature, county results, city council, school boards, higher education, Supreme Court, you name it, the link to our results page is in the show notes. We have a few more episodes to go still in this election season, but I did want to say before we sign off this week, if you listen to this show throughout this insane election cycle, my sincerest thank you. The show wouldn't be possible without you, the listeners, and I'm so grateful to those of you that committed a half an hour a week to give us a chance as we launch this new show. Again, more episodes to come still this year, but just had to say that as we start to wrap up our 2024 coverage. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere. We'll be back in your feed with a new episode next week. We'll see you then.